everybody, I'm Audrey Robinson, and this is Existential Theory for Children and Adolescents. Now, if you are watching this video as part of a theories course, then this slide is one that I have put in there with everyone, but just in case you found this video some other way, I'm going to kind of touch on theories in kids. So all theoretical orientations for counseling and therapy can be scaffolded to be more concrete to meet the differences in development for children and adolescents. While it may seem, looking at some from the outside, that some theories lend themselves more naturally to that, any theory can be scaffolded to meet their needs. So I challenge you to choose your theoretical orientation and learn one really well first, and choose the theoretical orientation for you based on the one that best fits your worldview, and then those theories can be tailored and scaffolded to fit the needs of kids and adolescents. One way theories have been adapted for kids is through play therapy. There are many different orientations to play therapy. Sand tray, activities, and expressive arts are others ways to scaffold theories. And, I have to say that all these theories once were developed by old white guys. So we as counselors have to also work to make sure that we are able to scaffold and adapt these theories to work with a variety of people who come from a variety of backgrounds. Let's talk about existential theory. So there's some existential play therapy, and there's also ways that non-directive humanistic skills and techniques can be used with kids and adolescents. And actually, existentialists call it existential child therapy. All right, so I love this quote, and if you'll notice, it's from 1987, so some of this information is a little older. So this is not one of the more popular orientations to children, and there hasn't been a lot of research done with existential and kids and adolescents, or really existential altogether, as some of the other areas that are more researched. So existential therapy demands active engagement between child and therapist and confronts broad moral issues such as what it means to be a good person, what matters in life, and how the individual influences those life events. Existential child therapy moves beyond self-acceptance by challenging children to remove their own obstacles to growth and to engage in self-determination within personal and environmental limits. We know kids don't have a lot of control in their lives, but kids do have control with how they respond, and so we're capitalizing on that in existentialism. All right, so existential theory over there on the right, if you are, seeing this lecture as part of your theory class, then you are familiar with what's on the right and from the chapter and pro tip. What's on the right will help you with your weekly assignments. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of existential child therapy and how that looks. Feel free to read through the information on the right. So the process of development begins at birth. We know that about children. Research has shown that. And as children grow and mature, their interactions with their environments contribute to how authentic they are, their authentic self. And there are important features early in development, that feeling of commitment, control over one's destiny, and motivation for challenge and for change. So how children interact with their environments and how their environments are kind of help shape that authenticity and those feelings of commitment, control, and challenge. Meaning in life is achieved by expanding one's abilities and experiences, and so your own sensitivity to awareness is affected. Each child is a unique individual with a meaningful existence at any point or any age in time. We don't believe children have to be a certain age to be, to say they have a meaningful existence. Every individual has capacity for self-reflection, even children, and in existential child therapy, the therapist does not lead, but guides the individual to determine their own strengths and responsibilities. All individuals, even kids, must confront their facticities, which is the purpose in life is associated with changing limits where possible and working within the limits when necessary. So that's working within the home environment, within the guardians and parents' limits. Children possess the freedom to make decisions within the limits set by family members and can accept responsibility. That's a little bit, that last slide was a little bit on the nature of the person and the maladjustment. So here we go. Here's our existential goals for children. Existential child therapy differs from existential adult therapy in its emphasis on humanistic core conditions of empathy, unconditional positive regard, and genuineness and it's lesser application of confrontive communication. So we're kind of going back to what Roger said, those core conditions, and we're using less confrontive communication than we would with adults in existential. So Moustakis, and you're going to hear me reference this guy throughout, he's a huge existential child therapist. 1973 identifies the core conditions for existential child therapy as faith, acceptance, and respect. By communicating these conditions to child clients, we as therapists encourage them to face themselves, recognize and express their true feelings, deal with anxiety, and make future-oriented decisions, which restore self-esteem, that sense of individuality, and the acceptance of responsibility for self-development. And some of those are existential buzzwords, right? That sense of responsibility, authenticity, freedom, individuality. All right, so here we go with Moustakis and his theory of change. So Moustakis said that when kids are worked with in therapy, they go kind of through this progression. At first, they start with diffused emotions. The emotions are undifferentiated, mostly negative emotions, and maybe they're magnified or generalized or easily come out. Then we move into direct hostility. So it's no longer undifferentiated. Attitude of hostility becomes gradually sharpened, more specific, as the relationship with the therapist is strengthened and grows. Anger is expressed more directly and related to, that should say, a particular person instead of particular persons. And also direct hostility, as expressions are accepted, the feelings become less intense. So that acceptance in therapy is what helps the child to affect the less total experiences. I need to fix a couple typos in this. Anger and ambivalence is the next stage. Anger is still specific, but a variety of ambivalences appear. And then the play fluctuates between aggression and some more positive forms of expression. And then finally, in the final stage of existential child therapy, you have more positive feelings. Play is more realistic. There's more positive and negative attitudes, but they're more separated, not as much together. All right, existential child therapy phases. So I'm going to talk through a little bit on each one of these phases. So the first one is reduction of nihilism. And nihilism is a term in existential thought that refers to a sense of meaninglessness catalyzed by denying what's important to yourself and just defaulting on setting goals for personal growth. In authentic children enter therapy with a denial of their feelings and perceptions of reality. Their mode of coping with stress is regressive. They ignore or refuse to recognize the problem. The therapist seeks to reduce nihilism by establishing an authentic relationship with the child, by communicating genuine acceptance, empathy, and respect, and by giving the child freedom to regain contact with his or her true feelings and selfhood. That positive environment is really key for that first step, that reduction of nihilism. All right, then the second phase is recognition of problem and feelings. So within that supportive therapy environment, the child begins to acknowledge the problem and the feelings associated with it. So we're working on awareness in this stage. The therapist is continually accepting and empathic and now guides the child toward recognition of his or her ability to change the situation. As a result, the child begins to perceive his or her role in and responsibility for the problem situation. This recognition may lead to feelings of guilt and despair. The therapist emphasizes the positive aspect of responsibility, that one's control over events also means that one can change them for the better. Compared with traditional approaches, existential therapy moves rapidly toward the child's recognition of responsibility and control. While the child's power is limited by parents and other family members, the child decides how to respond in the environment and the quality of his or her proactive behaviors. All right, our next phase is development of realistic alternatives for problem solution. As a child learns to express authentic feelings, he or she experiences initial relief and hope. At this point, the child's ideas for problem solution may be unrealistic and ineffective. Having established a firm, trusting relationship, the therapist may use confrontation to help the child face reality. You see how we're waiting until phase 3 to do any kind of gentle confrontation here. For children who enjoy role-playing, An adaptation of Maddie's 1985 technique of situational reconstruction may be appropriate at this stage. And there's more information about that linked in the resources about that situational reconstruction. Phase 4 is acceptance of alienation. The child's growing recognition of responsibility leads to feelings of vulnerability and isolation. The realization that even significant others are separate from the self and cannot be totally responsible for the child's circumstances. So this is kind of a loneliness stage, like, oh, I really truly am in control, and I am a separate person from my parents, whereas young children also often see themselves as one enmeshed with their parents. Rather than rescuing the child by denying this sense of alienation, the therapist seeks to help the child accept this as a natural condition of life. The presence of an empathic adult can comfort a sick child or a child rejected by peers. It is the child who must deal with the illness or rejection on a day-to-day basis. The adult cannot be sick or rejected for the child. So we can't do that for them. And it's really important that children experience these negative emotions, that they struggle within the safety net of their home families and the safety net that therapy provides with you as the counselor. All right, the next stage is acceptance of autonomy and its consequences. The child recognizes his or her responsibility for making choices to solve the immediate problem, but kind of goes between comfortable, past, and unfamiliar, future alternatives. The child may try out new positive ways of behaving, but, revert back to some of the original behaviors. The therapist guides the child toward future-oriented choices and helps the child accept anxiety as a natural part of growing. The therapist works toward understanding of the logical consequences of each choice and the advantages of future-oriented decisions. And if you saw the child-centered play therapy, that's very similar to that with the limit setting and the giving choices, if you saw that PowerPoint. Therapists do not choose for the child, but accepts the child's decisions and the child's responsibility for the consequences. We don't want our children we're not pushing them to always make the right choice. We're helping them to make the choice and then deal with the consequences. Existential therapists do not claim to be value-free, but guide the child toward the difficult growth alternatives. The child must make the final decision regarding his or her behavior and accept the consequences. And then finally, phase 6 is positive action and generalization of control. This last phase is characterized by simultaneous change in several aspects of the child's life. So many things might be changing. The goal is for the child to take control over his or her life by making future-oriented decisions, implementing these decisions, and then generalizing these behaviors to a variety of situations. So a lot of times, kids come into therapy and their parents may want help in one area, but we hope that by helping the whole child and the child in general, that these changes may go from one situation to be used in another situation. And the therapist in this stage is continuing to link the connection between choices and behaviors and others' responses. And there's lots of encouragement to recognizing the limits and the control that the child has in this too. And the focus in existential therapy is on choosing growth, engendering alternatives, and in recognizing both possibilities and limits affecting change. So we're looking at the environment and we're looking at what control the child has in their environment. Okay, love this quote. Again, this comes from Kitano and Levine, 1987. Existential psychology provides a valuable contribution to child therapy, particularly in its optimism, tempered by realism. Each child, like all human beings, possess a uniqueness or individuality that needs to be discovered and respected. I love that. I love that, looking at the kid as a person and reminding us that kids really are people too. All right, so here's a great existential resource out there. This book talks about existential therapy with children from an existential perspective. It has chapters on how to conceptualize using existential theory, practicing existential play, and using existential with families, which using any of these theories in family systems is a great way to work with them. Okay, want to learn more about existential therapy? There is this one video that I found from Diane Frey, who's quoted a lot in the research and is a founder of the Association for Play Therapy. And so this is, you know, a little podcast where she talks about the existential perspective. You'll notice there's not as many videos this week as there are in others, because again, a lot of the research and stuff, as you'll notice when I go here, email with questions, yay. A lot of the research you'll notice comes from long ago, and I won't start singing. You'll see a lot of this dates back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s. I don't know if there's anything more current than that. Nope. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, reach out. Thanks for watching.